Right, now this is about this 2012 MCQ paper. The first question, due to scarcity of resources. All right, so let's discuss the things that we have learned under the topic scarcity. So we know that we have human wants, and the fundamental quality of these human wants is that they are unlimited, right? They are unlimited. And on the other side, we have the resources that we use to produce goods and services in order to satisfy these wants. And the fundamental quality of resources is that they are limited. And at the same time, though they are limited, we say that they have alternative uses, right? They have alternative uses. And then due to the limited nature of the wants, on the other side, right? Due to the unlimited nature of wants and due to the limited nature of resources, we face the problem of scarcity. We face the problem of scarcity. And then again, due to the scarcity and resources having alternative uses, we face this problem of choice, right? We face this problem of choice. And when it comes to choice, we all know that every economic system needs to make three fundamental choices. And what are the three choices? The first one is what to produce in what quantity. The second one is how to produce. The third one is whom to produce. These are the three fundamental choices that every economic system should make. If not, we recognize these as the three basic economic problems. And what happens when you make a choice? When you make a choice, you will have to sacrifice all the other alternatives. And as a result, you face this problem of, if not, you face this opportunity cost. You face this opportunity cost when you make a choice. What is opportunity cost? That is the value of the second best alternative that you sacrifice on behalf of the chosen alternative. It's always the value of the second best alternative, not all the alternatives that you sacrifice. Hope you understand it. So this is what happens due to scarcity. And keeping this entire diagram in mind, we will go through all the given options. The first one is, due to scarcity of resources, every society must undertake central planning. There's no such rule which says so. Right? Due to scarcity, what happens? Every economic system, every society faces this problem of choice. Then they need to make these three basic choices, and then they create economic systems to find answers, if not to make those choices. This central planning is just that happens only in one type of economic system. So that is in common economic system. But on the other side, we have free market economies where we use price mechanism to find answers to these three questions. Every economy must undertake central planning. No, even the economies can use price mechanism due to the scarcity of resources. The second one, it says the government must decide how to allocate available resources. See, the first problem, what to produce in what quantity. Yes, it's true that we also recognize as the problem of resource allocation. It's true. So due to the scarcity, you need to make that choice, how to allocate available resources among the alternative users. It is true. So the problem with this second statement is, though this second part of the statement is true, the first part is not always true. See, the sentence says, due to scarcity of resources, it's the government that must decide how to allocate available resources. No, again, that happens only in common economic systems. So if you think about a free market economic system, in free market economic systems, the private sector decides how to allocate available resources among the alternative users. The problem with the second statement is the first part of that statement, and that first part is not always true. But the second part is always true, no problem with that. The third part, due to scarcity of resources, the third one says some members of each society must live in poverty. See, poverty is one thing, scarcity is something else, and these two are not connected to each other. And so there's no this relationship or the connection between scarcity and poverty. There's no connection, right? Scarcity is the limitedness of resources compared to unlimited human wants, and then poverty is a situation where you don't earn enough income at least to cover your basic needs. These two are not connected. And the fourth one, due to scarcity of resources, every society must choose among competing uses of available resources, and that's 100% true, and that's the immediate thing that happens due to scarcity. Look at this diagram. So due to scarcity, every society faces this problem of choice. So that is true. And the fifth one is, due to scarcity of resources, the resource availability exceeds the possible uses for available resources. I don't think that this has a meaning to explain. So here this sentence compares these two. On one side, they consider the availability of resources, and then on the other side, they compare that with the uses for the possible uses for available resources. So we have not compared these two, right? We have not compared these two when recognizing scarcity. So what are the two that we compare? The limited resources we compare with the unlimited ones. So that's what happens, right? So this fifth one doesn't have a meaning. So the answer has to be the fourth one, right? The second one. So the second one says, a production possibility curve might be shifted outward by each of the following except, all right. So we will first look at the reasons, the possible reasons for a outward shift, if not a rightward shift of the PPC. So this is the shape of a typical PPC, and this gets shifted to the rightward means this, right? So this is that shift. So on this side, we have, let's say, the good X for the time being, and here we have this good Y. So if you remember the theory, wait, I'll show you the theory, Theod. Yes, so look at this one. So under the topic shifting the PPC, we discussed about this outward shift and the inward shift, the rightward shift and the leftward shift. Here we have recognized, see, I'm referring to the rightward shift, if not the outward shift of the PPC. So I'm telling you there, this could happen due to following reasons. And if you look at this thing, there are three main reasons. The first reason is the increase in the amount of resources. The second one is increase in productivity of resources. And the third one is technological advancement. So these are the main three reasons for a rightward shift of the PPC. But if you look at this first one, in detail, අපි කතා කළොත් with regard to that first one, ඒක මෙහෙම වෙන්න පුළුවන්. So when I say that increase in the amount of resources, එතකොට it could be happen due to discovery of new resources. දැන් ඔය discovery කියන කතන්දරේ, discovery කියන term එක එතන එන්න ඕන with regard to the land resources. So discovery of new natural resources that we can use in the production process of goods and services. And then secondly, the amount of resources can increase due to the increase in labor supply, maybe due to population increase, or maybe when other people come to Sri Lanka, again the labor supply will increase. And then increase in capital goods. So when I say capital goods, it includes different types of capital goods. It could be the physical capital, the durable, the physical or the durable capital, or the circulating capital, or maybe the human capital, the natural capital, whatever. Right? Advancements in knowledge, skills, and expertise through education and training. See that now. Now it talks about the human capital. When human capital increases, again the capital in general increase. එතකොට මොකද වෙන්නේ? The amount of resources get increased, and as a result, the PPC get shifted to the right side, and then increase in entrepreneurship. So these are the main reasons. I mean, mainly we have only three: the increase in the amount of resources, increase in productivity, and the third one is increase in technology. එතකොට අර පළවෙනි ගියට මේ ටික තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. එතකොට මේවායින් එකක් වෙන්න එපා යතන තියෙන reasons. හරි. එහෙනම් ඒ ටික ඔළුවේ තියාගෙන let's come to the discussion of this second question. It says production possibility curve might be shifted outward by each of the following except one, and you just need to find that one. Okay, improvement in technology. Oh, that kind. When technology get more and more advanced, the PPC shifts to the right side. The second one, movement towards more open approach to free trade. Free trade, this is something that we discussed in ninth unit. What happens due to free trade? If not, what happens due to this international trade without any barriers? You can get raw materials into Sri Lanka. Maybe from China, you just import raw materials. You import other goods and services that you can use as inputs in the production of a different good or a service. When we have that international trade without any barriers, again you receive raw materials. Raw materials is a part of circulating capital. When you receive more and more raw materials due to free trade, your amount of resources go up, and as a result, the PPC shifts to the right side. That is also a possible reason for this outward shift of the PPC. And then the third one, decrease in unemployment. Decrease in unemployment means right now the economy must be producing at a point inside the PPC. The reason, even now the economy is facing unemployment. But what happens when this unemployment decreases? Your current production increases. Right? Current production increases. That increase can happen in this way. So if this is this first point and if this is the second point, see, the production level increases. And so that point moves towards the PPC, but still it only talks about the decrease in unemployment, which means the economy still faces a certain level of unemployment, but comparatively the unemployment, the rate of unemployment in the present economy is somewhat lower compared to the previous level of unemployment. But still we have unemployment. What happens when unemployment decreases? This point moves upward, but nothing happens to the PPC. Right? Nothing happens to the PPC. This has to be that reason. This must be the answer for the question. But we will go through the other points as well. The fourth one says increase in the educational level of general population. When education levels get increased, the human capital increases, and as a result, the PPC can shift to the right side. That is a possible reason for an outward shift. And the fifth one, improvement of productivity, is just one main factor that shifts the PPC to the right side. And the answer for the second one has to be the third option. Look at the third question now. It says, if resources were perfectly substitutable in all activities, which one of the following would be true? If you just select the relevant theory part for this thing, when resources become perfectly substitutable, what happens? Part theory. So let me show you that first before we discuss this thing. Right now, check this one. So we have this topic, different shapes of PPCs, and here I'm telling you the shape of the PPC changes when the nature of marginal opportunity cost changes. So when the nature of marginal opportunity cost changes, it changes the shape of the PPC. So we have a direct relationship between these two. And then if you look at the three shapes, the first one is straight line PPCs, and then I say the main reason behind the straight line PPC is the constant marginal opportunity cost. The second one, the main reason behind this PPC, which is concave to the origin, is increasing marginal opportunity cost. And the third one is the reason for having this PPC that is convex to the origin is decreasing marginal opportunity cost. This third scenario is not a practical, that's not real. The first two කියලා කිව්වම පළවෙනි එකත් එහෙම නැහැ. හැබැයි මේ දෙක somewhat common but not the third one. Right. එහෙනම් දැන් අපි ওই දෙක පොඩක් shape එකේ බැලුවොත් එහෙම මෙන්න මෙහෙම දෙයක් තියෙනවා. මොකක්ද තියෙන්නේ? තියෙන දේ තමයි if you come to this topic straight line PPC. එහෙනම් අපි කිව්වා right the main reason behind having this straight line PPC is the marginal opportunity cost being constant. එතකොට ඔයා මේ ටියුට් එකේ පොඩක් පහළට ආවොත් ඔයා දකිනවා reasons for having a constant marginal opportunity cost. So what's the reason? Homogeneous resources. Right? Homogeneous resources. At the same time, if you look at this second one, the main reason for the PPC to be concave to the origin is having increasing marginal opportunity cost. And if you check this next part, එතන මම කියනවා reasons for having increasing marginal opportunity cost. And the main reason is heterogeneous resources. Not being the resources, not being perfect substitutes for each other. Then poetic always, if you just come to this question number 3 again, if resources were perfectly substitutable in all activities, which one of the following would be true? මේක ඔයා දැනන් ඉන්න ඕනි. ඔය ප්‍රශ්න උත්තරේ සිලෙක්ට් කරනවා නම් මොකක්ද අර මම පෙන්නපු දේ. We have this relationship between nature of resources. We have this relationship between nature of resources and then the nature of marginal opportunity cost and then the shape of PPC. So we have this relationship. එතර මොකක්ද අපි මේක හරියටම කතා කළොත් if resources are homogeneous then the marginal opportunity cost will be constant, that will be equal in any point on the PPC. එතකොට the PPC takes this straight line shape. And on the other side, on the other side, if resources are heterogeneous, then the marginal opportunity cost will be increasing gradually. Then this PPC takes this convex to the origin shape. And if you have this in mind, you are ready to go through all the options given here. The first one, if resources were perfectly substitutable in all activities, which one of the following would be true? The first one, output of all goods could be increased at zero opportunity cost. See that now. I just told you that when resources are homogeneous, when they are perfectly substitutable in all the economic activities, I just told you that the marginal opportunity cost will be constant at any point. I didn't tell you that there won't be any marginal opportunity cost. There will be a marginal opportunity cost or simply opportunity cost, and that opportunity cost will have a value and that value is constant at any point. That's all I told you. එතර මේක කියන්නේ something else. Output of all goods could be increased at zero. No, there will be an opportunity cost and that opportunity cost is constant. That's the only thing. The second one, the production possibilities curve should be a straight line, 100% true. The reason behind this is this. When resources become homogeneous, when they become identical to each other, the marginal opportunity cost will be constant, and as a result, there will be a straight line PPC. So that's the connection. But we will go through the other points as well. Specialization and mutually beneficial trade would be impossible. එහෙම සිද්ධි කොහෙවත් නැහැ. එතකොට there's no connection between there's no direct, right? දැන් ඔය කියන වචන ඒක අරගෙන ඊට පස්සේ වෙන එකක් හිතාගත්තොත් මට ප්‍රශ්නයක් වෙන නිසා මම කියන්නේ මොකද්ද? There's no direct connection between the nature of the resources being perfectly substitutable and having specialization and mutually beneficial trade. එහෙම මේකේ direct relationship එකක් නැහැ. එතකොට දැන් ඕක ගැන ඔයාලට කිව්වොත් එහෙම mutually beneficial trade would be possible if that country has absolute advantage or maybe comparative advantage over producing a particular good. එතකොට if they have this comparative advantage or maybe the absolute advantage, එතකොට having perfectly substitutable resources කියන එක නෙමෙයි කතන්දරේ, අර දෙක තියෙන එක තමයි කතන්දරේ. මොකක්ද? If they have this absolute advantage over one good or the comparative advantage over that good, then they can enter to mutually beneficial trade with other countries. එතකොට the resources being perfectly substitutable and having this mutually beneficial trade, those are not directly related. Right. The fourth one, no country or individual would have a comparative advantage in any activity. I just explained the same thing. The fifth one, scarcity of resources would be eliminated. No, again, that has nothing to do with scarcity. ඒවා perfectly substitutable වෙන්න පුළුවන් නොවෙන්න පුළුවන්. We always face this problem of scarcity. This has no meaning. Then what's the possible answer for this one? The answer is the second one. That's a straightforward one. Right. Look at the fourth one. It says, which one of the following would be a macroeconomic topic? එතකොට අපි ඕකත් කතා කරන කලින්, if you just look at the difference between macroeconomic and microeconomics, sorry, මෙතන අහන්නේ microeconomic topic. So if you just look at the difference between macroeconomics and microeconomics, wait, I'll show you that difference first before we discuss this thing. Okay, look at this. It says on this side we have macroeconomics and on the other side we have microeconomics, and it says the branch of economics that studies the behavior and performance of the economy as a whole is called macroeconomics. And on the other side, what do you see? The branch of economics that studies the behavior of individual economic variables is called microeconomics. So that's the difference between the two. That's the main difference between the two. If you look at the variables that we normally study under macroeconomics, what are the variables? We study about aggregate output, the total output of the entire country. We study about the aggregate income, the total income of the entire country, the inflation, something relevant to the entire economy, employment level in the entire economy. See that now we consider those the large scale variables here. But when it comes to microeconomics, we just study the demand, supply, and price of a good. So I always ask this question when I teach this part. I always ask this question: from which part of this sentence I communicate the idea that this is about microeconomics? එතර ඔයාලා ඒ වෙලාවට කියන ආන්සර් එක තමයි demand කියන එකකින් නෙමෙයි, supply කියන එකකින් නෙමෙයි, price කියන එකකින් නෙමෙයි, but from this part of this sentence I'm communicating that we are considering microeconomics. මොකද? We consider the demand of one good, of a good. We consider the supply of one good. We consider the price. We study about the behavior of price of one good. And එතනින් තමයි this becomes microeconomics. එතකොට if you look at the second one, even in the second one, I'm referring to the production cost of one firm, and this a firm, one firm, that part communicates the idea of microeconomics. Right? So keeping that in mind, come to the question number 4. It says, which one of the following would be a microeconomic topic? So that must be related to one good, one firm, one factor, or one consumer. It must be individual, right? Somehow. Then look at this. A general rise in interest rates. The general rise related to the entire economy. No, it's a macroeconomic concept. A drop in inflation rate is once again related to the entire economy. The third one, an increase in GDP in the entire country is again macroeconomics. A drop in Sri Lanka's unemployment rate is once again macroeconomics. An increase in the price of milk powder. See that now, milk powder. We have billions of goods. We have billions of services in the economy, but this time you only consider the prices of milk powder, which is one good, so that it becomes a variable that you study in microeconomics. And an answer has to be the fifth one for the fourth question. Right. Now look at the fifth question. A free good has which one of the following characteristics? So in economics, we have two different types of goods. On one side, we have free goods, and on the other side, we have economic goods. එතකොට මේ free goods කියලා නේ non-economic goods කියලා කියන එක තමයි. But before I get into the question, let me show you the relevant theory here. So this is the difference. Here you see the difference between non-economic goods, the free goods, and the economic goods. See the list. Look at the list. Goods with following qualities are called non-economic goods. The first one, supply is decided by nature. Unlimited supply compared to human wants. When the supply is available, we have unlimited supply compared to human wants. The third one, not produced with scarce resources. It is not produced, we just receive it from the nature. And if you receive it from the nature, and if there's no scarcity related to those goods, then you don't need to make choices. And if you don't make choices, then there's no opportunity cost, and they are always available at zero price. So these are the things that we have discussed with regard to non-economic goods. Now come to the question. It says, a free good has which one of the following characteristics? I hope that you all remember the list. The first one, it has no opportunity cost in supply. 100% true, because I told you they are in abundance. When the supply is available, the supply is unlimited. So you don't need to make choices. And if you don't make choices, then there's no opportunity cost. So this is true. But we will go through the other options as well. It is generally supplied by the government. No, it is supplied by the nature. We receive it from nature. So that's why the second one is wrong. The third one, it has no externalities associated with its consumption or maybe production. ඒතර අපි මේකට example එකක් විතර tute එකේම තියෙන. Look at this one again. It says under examples we have air, water, and then sunlight. Just think about sunlight. එතකොට මේකේ sunlight ගත්තොත් එහෙම, sunlight, generally, of course, we have positive externalities. Otherwise, without sunlight, we can't even survive in the world. So we have positive externalities. When there's too much sunlight, that's a burden for us. And then we have what? Negative externalities. So from these free goods, you can have both positive externalities and negative externalities. Then මෙතනදී මේ example එකේ එකම good එකෙන් you can have both. එනිසා මේක කියන්නේ මොකද්ද? It has no externalities. No, you can have both positive and negative externalities when it comes to the free goods. So this is wrong there. The fourth one, it is in perfectly inelastic supply. මං අහනවා ඔයාලට මතකද කියලා what you saw here. එතන මොකද්ද තියෙන්නේ? Since this is provided by nature, right? Since this is provided by nature, the supply may be inelastic, right? Supply may be inelastic. Supply is the supply is decided by nature. So the supply may be inelastic, but it doesn't mean that the supply is perfectly inelastic. So that's a different meaning. Being elastic and having perfectly elastic supply are two different meanings. The last point says its production is subjected to the law of diminishing returns. No, the production is not subjected to any law. The reason there's no production at all when it comes to free goods. There's no production. It is supplied by nature. If you look at this one, see, not produced with scarce resources. If it is not produced, then this law of diminishing marginal returns is not applicable. And that's why we select this one as the answer for the fifth question. Right. Look at the sixth question now. It says, which of the following is a fundamental aspect of the free market economic system? So before we look at the options again, we will just go through the note quickly and then come to the given options. So look at this one. Here you see the list of characteristics of a free market economic system. The first one, properties are owned by the private sector. Not only that, the properties are owned by the private sector, and the private property right is protected by the legal system. And then basic economic problems are solved through price mechanism. Incentives are based on self-interest, having free enterprise, freedom of choice, and then having competition, and government playing a limited role are the main characteristics. So keeping that in mind, come to this sixth question again. The question is asking us to select a fundamental aspect of the free market economic system. The article matakana meva nothing. A high degree of government involvement. No, it's the opposite. Public ownership of resources. No, it has to be the private ownership of resources. And third one, private property. Yes, having private property and protecting private property rights is the fundamental aspect. So that is the answer. But read the fourth one. Central planners set wages and prices. No, that happens in common economic systems, not in free market economic systems. The fifth one, employers consult government agencies for guidance in hiring workers with appropriate job skills. There's no meaning for this one. So the answer has to be the third one. All right, look at this seventh one. In the seventh one, what has happened? We see this diagram. So that has to be a demand curve. Because on this side we get the quantity and on this side we have the price, and it shows a negative relationship. And then it says the diagram above shows the market demand. The market demand for this good X. A movement from point A to point B would mostly likely be caused by. All right. So the market has moved from point A to point B. So this is where the market equilibrium was, but now that has shifted to this point B, right? That has shifted to this point B, right? So this has to be the first supply curve and this has to be the second supply, right? Now, keeping this in mind, we will go through all the points. An increase in the price of good Y, which is a substitute. Okay. So let's discuss this. An increase in the price of good Y. If this good Y is a substitute, මොකද වෙන්නේ? අපි හිතමු we have these two goods. What are the two goods? On one side we have Coca-Cola and on the other side we have Pepsi-Cola. Right? Pepsi-Cola. අපි හිතමු. එතකොට this is the considering good, and then an increase in the price of good Y, which is a substitute. Okay, Pepsi-Cola price get increased. Price of Pepsi get increased. If so, what will happen? The people who were consuming, the consumers who were consuming Pepsi now moves from Pepsi to Coca-Cola, and as a result, right? As a result, the demand curve gets shifted to the right side, not that this point moves from A to B. So that's wrong there. So which is not the correct answer. First one is not the correct answer. Second one, an increase in consumers' income. When the consumer's income increases, again, if it's a normal good, assuming that this is a normal good, what happens? The demand curve gets shifted to the right side. And the point, nothing happens to the point. Again, the whole curve gets shifted to the right side. This market has moved from point A to B. That has nothing to do with this second option. The third one, a decrease in consumers' income. That's simply the opposite of the previous one. So if the consumer's income decreases, then the demand curve, the whole curve gets shifted to the left side, not that this point moves from A to B. So that is also not appropriate. The fourth one, a decrease in production cost for good X. What is it again? A decrease in production cost. So when the production cost decreases, it doesn't affect to the demand curve. So demand curve lies on the same place. But when the production cost decreases, the supply increases. Production cost decreases so that the supply increases. And when supply increases, what happens to the supply curve? The supply curve gets shifted to the right side. And as a result, the market price reduces from A to B. When demand being constant, the supply increases, and as a result, the market price decreases and the market quantity increases. And this is a possible answer. Right, the fifth one, decrease in the supply of good X. If it's a decrease, it should move the other way around. It should move from point B to A. Mokada, if I consider this as my initial supply curve and this as my second supply curve, when the supply decreases, the supply curve gets shifted to the left side as I mentioned here. This point moves from B to A, not from A to B. A movement from point A to B. So the answer has to be the fourth one there, right? Fourth one is the answer. Eighth question. Which of the following would shift the supply curve of a good to the left? ඉතින් දැන් අපි මේ කතා කරන්නේ මොකක්ද? අපි කතා කළා a decrease in production cost of good X would shift the supply curve to the right side. Okay, අනිත් පැත්ත වුණොත් then that will shift the supply curve to the left side. එහෙනම් මේ තියෙන එකේ ආන්සර් එක මොකද්ද? An increase in the cost of production. ඒතර lazy. හරිද? Nothing to discuss again. නමුත් මම ඊටු ටිකක් ඔයාලට පෙන්නලා දෙන්නම්. මේක දැන් ඔයාලට තේරෙනවනේ මේක අතර තිබුණ එකමයි. both are same නේ. හැබැයි මේ ටික බලන්න. An increase in the price. See, when the price of the considered good increases or even if it decreases, right? It doesn't affect to the supply curve. Right? It doesn't affect to the whole supply curve. මොකද වෙන්නේ? When the price increases or decreases, what will happen? When the price increases or decreases, a point on the supply curve will move upward, or maybe a point on the supply curve will move downwards. A point moves maybe upward or maybe downwards, but nothing happens to the supply curve. So there won't be any shift in the supply curve. These are my answers. Dekama varadi. And then the fifth one, which of the following would shift the supply curve of a good to the left side? A decrease in demand. No. අපි ඒකත් ඕනනම් කියලා දෙන්නම් මෙන්න මෙහෙම අර කලින් question එකේ අනිත් පැත්ත වෙන්නේ එතකොට. ඒ කියන්නේ වෙන්න මෙහෙමයි වෙන්නේ. You have the let's say a typical supply curve and a demand curve, right? This is the initial demand curve. So D1 and this is the supply curve, the only supply curve. And then what happens? A decrease in demand happens. So as a result, the demand curve gets shifted to the left side. See what happened. See what happened. Earlier, the producers were supplying this much of a quantity, but now the quantity supplied decreases. But what happens to the supply curve? It remains the same, but the quantity supplied decreases. This won't shift the supply curve, and that's why this is wrong. What's the only answer? The first one. Right, now look at the ninth one. It says a consumer finds that his total expenditure on rice stays the same after the price of rice declines. All right. What has happened here? The price of 1 kilo of rice has reduced, but there's no difference when it comes to total expenditure of the consumer. ඒතර ඔයාලට මේ කියනකොට මේ points ටික මතක් වෙන්න ඕනේ the relevant theory part. හැබැයි කමක් නෑ අපි ඊටු ටික කියලා බලමු. Other things being equal, which of the following is true for this price change? දැන් මේකට relevant කතන්දරේ මොකක්ද? ඒ කතන්දරේ තමයි මෙන්න මේක. Wait, I'll show you that. See, the consumer's outlay, if not the consumer's expenditure or the producer's revenue, and the price elasticity of demand. So on one side, we take the PED, and on the other side, we take the consumer expenditure, and we are going to discuss the connection between these two. ඕක තමයි උනේ මේ topic එකේ යට. එතකොට මම ඔයාලට පෙන්නන්නම් ඔය කතන්දරේ මොකද වෙන්නේ කියලා. We discussed this in 2011 paper as well, as I remember. ඒතර මම පොඩි table එකක් ගත්තොත් මෙන්න මේ වගේ tables දෙකක් අපි ගමු. So let me take, this is the price of the good, and this is the quantity of the good, and this is the consumer expenditure, the total expenditure, right? So just imagine that the price is 100 and the quantity is also 100. right? එතකොට මම මේ table උඩින් ලියන්නම් මෙන්න මෙහෙම කතන්දරයක්. Let me consider an inelastic demand here. Let me consider an inelastic demand here. එතකොට if the product is having an inelastic demand, let's assume the price get doubled, right? Even if the price get doubled due to this inelastic nature of demand, the consumers are not in a position to reduce the demand drastically, significantly. Elisa, let's assume that demand drops only by just 10 units, even if the price get doubled. So based on these values, we will calculate the consumer's expenditure. So in the first case, it's just 10,000, but in the second case, it's 18,000. So what does that give you? It shows you that we have this relationship. We have this positive relationship between the price and the consumer's expenditure when the demand is inelastic, right? When the demand is inelastic. And then let me take another table, right? Let me take another table. අපි මේ වගේම table එකක් අරගමු මේ පැත්තට. But now, okay, let me write on the top of this table, let me write that I'm trying to present a good with elastic demand inside this table. Again, the initial values are still the same. The price is 100, the quantity is 100, so that the consumer expenditure is 10,000. 100 into 100 will give you 10,000. Now what happens? The price get increased slightly. Just imagine that the price increases by 1 rupee. So the price increases to 101. Since we are facing an elastic demand for this product, when the price get increased slightly, the quantity drops significantly. So assume the quantity to be, the new value to be just 10. When the price get increased by 1 rupee, the quantity drops to 10. And if you calculate the consumer expenditure now, that will be 101 and then put this 0. So now you can recognize the relationship between P and QD when the demand for the product is elastic. So what's the relationship? When the price increases, consumer expenditure decreases. And now let me take another table, and in this new table, I will write this. So we have the price, and then we have the quantity, and then we have the consumer expenditure. So just imagine that price is 100 and quantity is also 100, but using this table, I'm going to present a product with unitary elastic demand. A product with unitary elastic demand. Right. So unitary elastic demand. Now what happens? The initial expenditure will be just 10,000 like in all the other tables, and the price get doubled, increased by 2 times. And then if the product is having a unitary elastic demand, the drop in the quantity should be in the same proportion. Then araka get double nang make a half win on. The quantity drops to 50. Now calculate the consumer's expenditure. That will be once again just 10,000. Now what's the connection? The price has increased, but the consumer expenditure remains same, which means there's no relationship. Even if the price increases or decreases, the consumer's expenditure will not change. Then what on noka පැහැදිලි වුණානේ. Then let me show you the conclusion clearly. Conclusion එක තමයි මෙන්න මේක. අපි conclusion එකට තව table එකක් ගත්තොත් මේ දේවල් ඔයාට වටිනවා කියලා මම කියන දෙයක් නෑ. You should understand that. So let me show you the conclusion. So let me consider price here, and then relationship between the price and consumer expenditure. Consumer expenditure කිව්වත් එකයි, මේකට producers revenue කිව්වත් එකයි, දෙකම එකයි. So this is consumer expenditure or maybe producers revenue. Either way, it's the same thing. ඊළඟට තව එකක් මම ගන්නම් ඔයාලට වඩා හොඳට. So let me take the meaning, right? Let me take the meaning, right? අපි දැන් මේ වෙන මොකුත් කරන්නේ නැහැ. ඔයාලට theory මොකුත් ඕනේ නැහැ. ඔයා දැන් අහන් හිටියනේ මේක, right? If so, This is not price, it has to be the nature of elasticity. So let me write elasticity. එහෙනම් right. අපි ගමු අර පළවෙනි එක අපේ. මොකද පළවෙනි එක inelastic. If the demand, so demand elasticity, right? So this has to be demand elasticity. If the demand is inelastic, as we discussed here, when the price increases, consumer expenditure also increases, which means we have a positive relationship. And we have a positive relationship. And the meaning is this: when price increases, consumer expenditure decreases. So that's the meaning. If not, on the other side, we can write if price decreases, consumer expenditure, my mistake. Sorry about that, right? So when the demand is inelastic, as you all see in this table, when the price increases, the consumer expenditure also increases. Sorry about that. It increases. When the price decreases, even the consumer expenditure decreases. So that's the correct one, right? And then look at this one, the second table. If the demand is elastic, then we have a negative relationship between P and CE. This means when the price increases, consumer expenditure decreases, and on the other side, when the price increases, when the price decreases, when the consumer expenditure increases. When the demand is unitary elastic, there's no relationship. What does that mean? The price may increase or the price may decrease, but the consumer expenditure remains same. Hope you'll understand this, right? So this is the conclusion. Now what needs to happen? මේ කතන්දරේ ඔළුවේ තියාගෙන, right? මේ table එක ඔළුවේ තියාගෙන just come to the given options. මොකද්ද වෙන්නේ එතන? A consumer finds that his total expenditure on rice stays the same. Total expenditure on rice stays the same. If so, see that now. The total expenditure on rice stays the same and the price declines. The total expenditure remains the same. See, the total expenditure remains the same and the price increases or decreases, which means the product is having a unitary elastic demand, right? The product is having a unitary elastic demand. So that's the meaning. Rice is an inferior good to this consumer. See that now. Let me explain that as well. So simply by looking at the then looking at the price, what if I ask this question? Looking at the price, looking at the relationship that exists between price and the consumer expenditure, can you decide whether the good is inferior or not? But if you compare the consumer's income and the demand, you can comment on the nature of the product, whether this is an inferior good or a normal good. Simply by comparing these two, by looking at the relationship that exists between price of the product and the consumer's expenditure, now you can't comment on the nature of the good. You can't recognize whether the good is inferior or not. You can't do that. Elisa, this is wrong. The second one, the consumer's demand for rice increased in response to the price change. Demand increase in response to the price change. The price change the price has decreased, right? The price has decreased. The consumer's demand for rice increased in response. That has increased. shape true. Even if you look at this third table, when the product is having a unitary elastic demand, see, when the price increases, then price decreases කියන part එකනේ. See, the price has decreased. When the price decreases, let's say from 200 to 100, the quantity has increased. The quantity has increased. So ඒ කතන්දරය හරි. හැබැයි ඒක අපි චුට්ටකට තියාගමු. ඒක දැනට හරි. Consumers' demand for rice increased in response to the price change. Okay. Well, the price has decreased, and in response to that, the demand has increased. The quantity demanded has increased. The third one, the consumer's demand for rice is perfectly price elastic. No, that is not perfectly elastic. It has to be unitary elastic. This is wrong. The consumer's demand for rice is perfectly inelastic. No, once again, that's just unitary elastic. And on fifth one is consumer's demand for rice is unit price elastic, and that's the exact one that we were looking for. එතකොට දැන් ඔයාලට තියෙන ප්‍රශ්නේ තමයි මොකද ප්‍රශ්නේ out of these two which one is the most accurate one, the precise one. දැන් ඒක බැලුවොත් එහෙම මේ ස්ටේට්මන්ට් එක මෙන්න මෙහෙම වුණා නම් මේ දෙකෙන්ම එකම මීනින්ග් කියන්නේ මොකක්ද? The consumer's demand for rice increased in the same ratio, increased in the same ratio to the rate of change in price. එහෙම කිව්වනම් මේ statements දෙකම identical. Consumers' demand for rice increased in the same ratio to the rate of change in price. එතකොට අපේ example එක නම් when the price get doubled, the quantity drops by half. එතකොට ratio එක 50%. එතකොට 100%, sorry, 100%. ඕක තමයි කතන්දර. එකක් double වෙනකොට එකක් දෙකෙන් multiply වෙනකොට අනිත් එක දෙකෙන් divide වෙනවා. එතකොට ratios දෙක සමාන වෙන්න ඕන. හැබැයි දැන් මේක කියන්නේ එහෙම ratio එක ගැන කියන්නේ නෑ. unitary elastic වෙන නම් ratio එක සමාන වෙන්න ඕනි. එතකොට මේකේ අර ratio එක සමානයි කියලා කියන කතාවක් නෑ. මේක කියන්නේ when price changes, when price drops, the demand has increased, the quantity demanded has increased. හැබැයි by how much? by how much කියන උත්තරේ මේක ඇතුලේ තියෙනවා. By the same ratio. ඒකයි it becomes unit price elastic. එහෙනම් out of the two, the most accurate one is the fifth one. So that's why we select that to be the answer. 10th question. Setting an effective price floor good. And when you look at these given the provided options, you can understand that they are asking us to recognize what happens to this consumer surplus and the producer surplus when a price floor, when a minimum price is imposed. So to recognize that, we will draw the relevant curves. So this is the quantity axis, and we get the price axis, and then we have a demand curve, and also we have a supply curve. So this is the market demand curve, and this is the market supply curve. And then I tell you, based on this market demand and the market supply, we can recognize this price P2 to be the equilibrium price, and then this quantity Q3 to be the equilibrium, sorry, Q2 to be the equilibrium quantity. And then what happens when imposing this minimum price? The government thinks that this equilibrium price P2 is not fair to the producer. So thinking that they impose a price higher than that equilibrium price as the minimum price. Then in this example, P3 is the minimum price. So let me write here, that's the minimum price. All right. Now the next part of the discussion is to recognize what happens to the consumer surplus and the producer surplus after imposing this minimum price. So see what happens immediately after imposing this minimum price. The market price get increased and the market quantity get decreased. Right? එතන දැන් ඔයාලා කවුරු හරි හිතනවා නම් එහෙම වෙන්නේ නැහැ, the quantity increases කියලා. ඒක වෙන්නේ මෙහෙමයි. See, when the minimum price is imposed, the minimum price is higher than the equilibrium price, so that the producers get encouraged to produce more. So they increase their quantity supplied to, let's say, Q3. Even if they increase the quantity supplied to this value Q3, the buyers are not going to buy that whole quantity. They will ask only for this Q1 quantity. So the market quantity is still, that's Q1, not Q3 that I showed you earlier. So the market quantity drops from Q2 to Q1, and then market price increases from P2 to P3. So these are the immediate changes that happens in the market after imposing the minimum price. Now the next part of the discussion is to recognize what happens to this consumer surplus and producer surplus before and after imposing this minimum price. So this is the situation before imposing the minimum price, and this will be the situation after imposing the minimum price, and I take this column just to mention the change. So here you see the consumer surplus and the producer surplus. All right, now we will try to recognize the consumer surplus before imposing this minimum price. Right. So this is what I always tell you when it comes to the consumer surplus. This consumer surplus is presented by the region below the demand curve, above the market price, up to the quantity that is traded in the market. Which region is that? I mean, before imposing the minimum price, which region fulfills all those three conditions? One of the conditions that has to be the region below the demand curve. So that is the first one. And also it has to be the region above the market price before imposing the minimum price. So before imposing the minimum price, the market price was P2. So the region is below the demand curve and above the market price P2 up to the quantity that is traded in the market. Which region is that? I'm referring to this region. So this is the region that we recognize. That is a region below the demand curve, above the market price, and up to the quantity that get traded in the market. So we can now write, if I label those regions, let's say that this is this region A, and this is region B, and this is region C. We have D, E, and then F. So I just write the labels here. So the region A, B, C represents the consumer surplus before imposing the minimum price. And in the same way, if I just try to explain the region which represents the producer surplus, which region is that? That is the region above the supply curve, right? So that is the region above the supply curve. And then below the price received by the producer. See, before imposing the minimum price, the market price was P2 and that was the same price received by the producer. We try to recognize the region above the supply curve and then below the price received by the producer up to the quantity that get traded in the market. So once again, which region is that? That is this triangle, right? That is this entire triangle. So what are the letters which represent that highlighted triangle? That is this letter D and then E and then F. So ABC region is the consumer surplus before imposing the minimum price. DEF is the region which presents the producer surplus before imposing the minimum price. Now let's see the situation after imposing the minimum price. So that is the region below the demand curve, above the market price, up to the quantity that is traded in the market. See, it has to be the region below this demand curve and it has to be the region above the market price. Now the minimum price is set so that the market price has to be that minimum price up to the quantity that get traded in the market. So what is the quantity that get traded in the market? That is this Q1 quantity. Hence, you only recognize this region to be the consumer surplus after imposing the minimum price. And now, let me once again ask, what is the region that presents the producer surplus? That is the region above the supply curve. Okay, it has to be the region above this supply curve. right? And then below the price received by the producer. Now, what's the price received by the producer? The minimum price is P3, so consumers pay this P3 price so that the producers receive this price P3 from the market. So if that is the price received from the market, this producer surplus has to be the region above the supply curve, below the price received by the producers, up to the quantity that is traded in the market. So the quantity that is traded in the market is this Q1 quantity. So this region we recognize, this region we recognize as the producer surplus. That is this region, right? So that is the region presented by B, D, and then F. Hope you all recognize that BDF is the new region which presents the producer's surplus. Okay, now let's try to recognize the change. Before imposing the minimum price, ABC was the consumer surplus, but after imposing that thing, that just drops to A. And the consumer surplus get reduced by the region B and by the region C. And then if you try to recognize the change that has happened in the producer surplus, so D is something common to both situations. Even F is something common to both situations. See, the producer surplus get reduced by the region E, but it get increased by the region B. It get increased by the region B. So if you simply compare the region B with the region E with the region B, you can simply recognize that this region E is this smaller triangle and the region B is this entire rectangle. Clear? So that this region B is greater than the region E. The region B is greater than the region E. So what has happened then? When you look at the table, you can clearly recognize that the ultimate thing that has happened is the consumer surplus has reduced. Alright, the consumer surplus has reduced by how much? By this region. But the producer surplus has ultimately increased. The region, the newly added region B is greater than the region E. So that the ultimate impact is the producer surplus has increased. So let me write the consumer surplus has decreased and the producer surplus has increased. And that has to be the answer. So let's try to recognize that from the given answers. So look at this one. Setting an effective price floor would increase consumer surplus. No, it reduces the consumer surplus. Once again, increase consumer surplus, so that it has to be wrong again. The third one, decrease consumer surplus and decrease. No, it's true that it decreases consumer surplus, but the minimum price increases producer surplus. So this part is not true. So this is wrong. The fourth one, decrease consumer surplus, true. Increase producer surplus, 100% true. So this is the answer. And then the fifth one, let's see the fifth one. Leave both consumer surplus and producer surplus unaffected. No, they get affected. Right? They get affected. The consumer surplus decreases and the producer surplus increases. So the answer is the fourth one for this 10th question. Right. Now, everyone, look at this 11th question. In the 11th one, it says, if the income elasticity of demand, or PED, if the income elasticity of demand for this good X is negative, sorry, not PED, it's about YED, my mistake. So it's about income elasticity of demand. So YED is negative. The other one, the cross price elasticity of demand, which is CED or maybe XED. So for the time being, let me write CED. The cross price elasticity of demand between the goods X and Y is Also negative. Okay, both are negative. Both YED and CED are negative. Which of the following must be true of good X? All right. So before we get into the discussion of the provided options, let me just show you the summary. Let me show you the meaning of YED being negative and CED being negative. Let me just show you that first. Look at this note. Okay, so this is about the cross price elasticity of demand. I'll take that first. So cross price elasticity of demand, and it says, the note says value of CED could be positive or negative, and depending on the value of CED, goods can be classified as substitutes or maybe as complementary. So the next part, CED, if CED is positive. And then I'm telling you, for substitute goods, CED will be positive, as there's a positive relationship between price and the price of a substitute good and the demand of the considered good. See, that's the point that you need to understand. If CED is positive, it simply communicates the idea that the two goods that you are considering are substitutes, right? The two goods that you are considering must be substitutes. And then, depending on the magnitude of CED, earlier, depending on the sign, whether the value is positive or negative, you can now recognize whether the goods are substitutes or complementary. So, simply the opposite of this has to be, if CED is positive, the goods are substitutes. And on the other side, if CED is negative, then the goods must be complementary, right? Complementary. And at the same time, what if CED is 0? Then the goods are unrelated. This entire note is here in this dude. So look at this one. So when CED is positive, and that is the first one. And look at this one, when CED is negative. So if you just go through this one, it just says the same thing that I mentioned earlier. If CED is negative, the goods are complementary, right? For complementary goods, CED will be negative. And also, as I mentioned earlier, see what happens. Let me erase this part. You can read this now. See what happens. It says, for unrelated or independent goods, CED will be 0. All right. So that is one thing, right? That is one thing. So what is that once again? CED will be positive for substitute goods. Then CED will be negative for complementary goods. And then CED will be just 0 for unrelated or maybe for independent goods. So that is one thing. There is one more thing that you need to understand, and that is this. So depending on the magnitude of the CED, the positive value of CED, you can recognize whether the goods are close substitutes or whether they are remote substitutes. So this positive value I divide into 2. If CED is positive and if it falls between 0 and 1, then the goods are substitutes, but at the same time they are remote substitutes. Secondly, if the value of CED is greater than 1, then the goods are close substitutes. So that's the meaning, right? That's the meaning. So let me tabulate all these data. Then this will help you to understand this question properly. So we don't need this. So let me tabulate the data. CED, right? CED. So I can write the 3 possible, let's say 4 possible sets of values. So CED is positive, right? That is positive. And let me write, it falls between 0 and 1, right? CED is positive and it falls between 0 and 1. Since the CED value is positive, the goods are, as we discussed earlier, they are substitutes. And since you get a positive value between 0 and 1, they are remote substitutes. Right? They are remote substitutes. They are remote substitutes. That's a point. And again, CED is positive, but the value is greater than 1. The value is greater than 1. Then what do we say? The goods are again substitutes, but close substitutes. Close substitutes. And then what if CED is negative? If CED is negative, we simply say that goods are complementary. Goods are complementary. And also, if CED is 0, then the goods are unrelated. The goods are unrelated. So this is the conclusion, depending on the value of CED. So let me keep it aside. So we'll keep it here. And then let's go back to the note and check the possible values taken for income elasticity of demand, YED. Right here, again I'm telling you, value of YED could be positive or negative, and depending on this, goods can be categorized as normal, superior, essential, or maybe inferior. Right? Right. So if YED is a positive value, then we can just understand that we are considering normal goods. But then again, our CED if that positive value is greater than 1, the goods are normal, but they are luxury goods. And if CED is positive, right? If YED is positive, and if the value is lower than 1, then the goods are essential, which means simply if YED is positive, the goods are anyway normal goods, but we recognize that there are two different types of normal goods. On one side we have luxury goods, and on the other side we have essential goods. So for luxury goods, the value will be positive when greater than 1, and for essential goods, the value will be positive but lower than 1. So that's one thing. And let's see, what if this YED value is negative? So if this YED value is negative, see what happens. We say the goods are inferior goods. If YED is negative, simply goods are inferior goods. Right? So it will never be 0. Now come back to the paper. We will prepare another table based on YED. So YED, right? YED, and I can take the same set and remove this 0 because it will never be 0. Now you write, if YED is positive, you know that the goods are normal, right? The goods are normal, but at the same time, we have two different types of normal goods. So if that positive value falls between 0 and 1, then the goods are essential goods. These are essential goods. And if the YED value is positive and just greater than 1, yes, once again the goods are normal, but those are luxury goods. This time we can recognize those to be luxury goods. And if it is negative, simply the goods are inferior goods. Right. Then what ඔය knowledge එක තියෙනවා නම් you can recognize the answer for this question very easily. එතන මේකෙන් මොකක්ද කියන්නේ? If the income elasticity of demand for good X is negative. Okay, income elasticity of demand is negative. Then the good has to be inferior. And then the cross price elasticity of demand between good X and Y is negative. Even this is negative. Then what does that mean? The two goods X and Y must be complementary to each other. Right? එහෙනම් අපි වැඩේ ඉවරයි. Let's try to recognize the answer. Hope you all see this. එහෙනම් එක පැත්තකින් based on YED the good is inferior. So one of these must be the answer. අනිත් පැත්තෙන් the goods must be complementary. So this has to be the answer. All the others are wrong. So this is the answer. Hope you all understand it. So for the 11th one, 4th is the answer. Right. Now we move to the 12th question. Right. We move to the 12th question. Look at the 12th question. Assume that demand for bottled water is relatively price elastic. All right. Relatively price elastic, and increase in supply of bottled water will result in which of the following? All right. So increase in supply. දැන් මේකේ මෙහෙමයි මේක ඔයාලට මේ ප්‍රශ්නෙට ඔයාලා දැන් තේරෙනවනේ මම මේක උගන්වන්නේ මේ ප්‍රශ්නෙට උත්තරේ දෙන එක නෙමෙයි මම අවංකවම මේ කරන්නේ ඔයාගේ පේපර් එකේ මේ ප්‍රශ්න ආවොත් ඔයා කොහොමද ඒව ගැන හිතන්න ඕනි කියන එක පෙන්වන එකයි මම මේ කරන්නේ. ඉතින් ඒක ඔයාලට තේරෙනවා කියලා මම හිතනවා. එතකොට මම මේ ප්‍රශ්න ටිකත් ඔයාගෙන් අහන්න නැත්නම් මේ කතන්දරේ incomplete වෙන නිසා. So when they say that the demand for bottled water is relatively price elastic, right? When they say so, imagine that you just need to draw a demand curve. I don't know whether we need to draw a demand curve here or not. මම කියන්නේ එහෙම අඳින්න ඕන වුණොත් එතන what will be the shape of that demand curve that you construct when the demand is relatively price elastic? එතන කොහොම demand curve එකක්ද අඳින්න ඕනේ? දැන් මේ වගේ demand curve එකක් ඇඳුත් ඒ වගේ වෙලාවක is it correct? දැන් මෙහෙම demand curve එක steeper demand curve එක. Then that's not correct. This is almost perfectly inelastic. Almost, right? Not perfectly inelastic. හැබැයි shape එක ඒ පැත්තට තමයි මේක වැඩියම බර. ඒ නිසා ඒව දැනන් ඉන්න ඕන මොකක්ද? The relationship that exists between the shape of the demand curve and the elasticity of demand. එතකොට if the demand is price elastic මෙන්න මෙහෙම එකක් ඇඳෙන්න ඕනේ. දැන් හිතන්නකෝ මෙහෙම if you just draw a demand curve which is parallel to the quantity axis, what does that tell you? The demand is perfectly elastic. Perfectly elastic නම් මෙහෙමයි. මොකද perfectly elastic නම් even if the price doesn't change, the quantity changes. So that's the meaning of being perfectly price elastic. හැබැයි මෙතන කියන්නේ it's not perfectly elastic but relatively elastic. Then the slope of the demand curve must be very low. Right? The slope of the demand curve must be very low. So this has to be the shape. නැතෝ මේ වගේ demand curve එකක් ඇඳුත් මෙන්න මෙහෙම demand curve එකක් ඒක එච්චර සුදුසු නෑ මේ වගේ වෙලාව. හරි. So the slope is very much lower. And on this side we get the quantity axis. Here we get the price axis. ඊළඟ මොකද කියන්නේ ඒගොල්ලෝ? An increase in supply of bottled water will result in the following. Which one of the following? Okay, අපි බලමු දැන් if this is the initial supply curve, when the supply increases, the supply curve gets shifted to the right side. So this is S2 now. So the supply curve gets shifted to the right side. And if you look at the changes that happen in the market, see ඔයාටම තේරුම් ගන්න පුළුවන් මේක හරි විදිහට ඇන්දම ඔයාට තේරුම් ගන්න පුළුවන් what happens to the market price. What happens to the market price? මම කියනවා මෙන්න මෙහෙම වචනයක්. Market price decreases by very insignificant amount. මාරම චූටි වෙනසක් තමයි ඔයාට පේන්නේ between T2 and T1. The market price decreases insignificantly. ඒක. දෙවැනි එක, what happens to the quantity? The quantity increases significantly. Right? The quantity increases significantly. එහෙනම් මම එක පැත්තක ලියනවා මොකද්ද? Market price decreases by a small amount, and on the other side we write market quantity increases by a large amount. Right. එතන මේ වගේ සිටුේෂන් එකක් දීලා මොකක්ද අහන ප්‍රශ්නේ? An increase in supply of bottled water will result in which one of the following? එහෙනම් අපි බලමු දැන්. A decrease in price. Yes, the price decreases, leading to an increase in total revenue. දැන් ඔයාලට මේවා කියනකොට දෙයක් මතක් වෙන්නත් ඕන. So that is one thing. The other thing, a decrease in price. Yes, again the price decreases, leading to a decrease in total revenue. Are two things. ඊළඟට an excess supply of bottled water. There's no excess supply. We don't see something here. Something එකනේ similar to the excess supply of excess demand. එහෙම එකක් මෙතන පේන්නේ නැහැ. The fourth one, an excess demand. එහෙම එකකුත් නැහැ. මම කිව්වා a relatively small decrease in price. That is somewhat better than the first two කියලා අපිට නිකන් shape එකේ හිතෙනවා. A relatively small decrease in price and no change in equilibrium. ඒක වැරදිනේ. No change in equilibrium තනිකර වැරදි. ඒතර relatively small decrease කියන එක that is very good. ඒ කියන්නේ that's better than the first two. නිකන් there's a price decrease කියනට වඩා the price decreases by a small amount කියන එක මේ වගේ වෙලාවක සිරාට match වෙනවා. But the problem now you need to recognize the correct answer out of these two නේ. ඒතර අපි ඇත්තටම මේක කරලා ඉවරයි already. කරලා ඉවරයි කියලා කියන්නේ ඇයි? I hope that you remember the table that we developed for this question 9. I think I have that table with, yes, this is the table that we developed. And let me get a copy of this table there. So, okay, now let's discuss this one. මොකද වෙන්නේ? Demand is elastic. එහෙනම් if demand is elastic, හොඳට අහගන්න. If demand is elastic, this is the relevant row. Right? This is a relevant row. Demand is elastic. And we discussed that there is a negative relationship between the price and the consumer expenditure. එහෙම නැත්නම් අපි කිව්වා there's a negative relationship between the price and the producer's revenue කියලා අපි already කතා කළා. There's a negative relationship. එහෙනම් දැන් අපි බලමු මොකද වෙන්නේ කියලා total revenue එක නැත්නම් producers revenue ට මොකද වෙන්නේ කියලා බලමු. එහෙනම් if demand is elastic, when the market price decreases by a small amount, when the market price decreases, again මේක the price decreases, මොකද වෙන්නේ? The consumer expenditure or maybe the producer's revenue increases. And now what's the answer out of these two? The correct answer is the first one. Right? Correct answer is the first one. එහෙනම් ඔයාට අර කලින් 9 question එක හොඳට තේරුණා නම් ඔයා මේ tables නම් මොන පොතේ ලියාගත්තා නම් you can understand the answer for this question 12 very easily. All right. Now we will move to this 13th question. Right? 13th question. By giving this graph in question 13, They say this: the graph above shows the market for good X. Okay, if the government imposes a specific tax on each unit of good X, okay, so we can understand that they have imposed. I mean, the government has imposed a unit tax, and that's why this has shifted to the left side parallel to the old supply curve. So we can recognize that. Then they ask which of the following presents the consumer surplus, producer surplus, and the deadweight loss after the imposition of the tax. එතකොට මේකටත් අර මම කලින් කියපු ටික වාට මතක නම් you can recognize the answer. කලින් කියපු ටික කියලා කියන්නේ මෙන්න මේ ටික. මෙතන I told you that this is how we recognize a consumer surplus and this is how we recognize a producer surplus. I explained the area. ඒතර ඔයාට ඒක මතක නම් මෙතනත් ඉච්චරම තමයි වෙන අතන එකයි මෙතන එකයි එහෙම වෙනසක් කරන්නේ නැහැ. Right. So this is the consumer's surplus, consumer surplus, producer surplus, and deadweight loss after imposition of the tax. All right. So we'll directly get into that. දැන් අපි අතනත් මේක කතා කරපු නිසා when this tax is imposed, let me show you three important prices here. Before the tax is imposed, we can recognize this to be the equilibrium price, and this is the equilibrium quantity. So before the tax is imposed, we have on one side the equilibrium price, that's P2, and Q2 is the equilibrium quantity. And if I ask one question in this situation, under the typical market conditions, without any government intervention, මම අහන ප්‍රශ්නයක්, what's the price paid by the consumer? P2. Also, let me ask another question. What's the price received by the producer? Again, P2. Both are same, but without any government intervention. Both are same. But what happens after the government imposes this unit tax? The market price increases from P2 to P3. Which means the consumer will have to pay a price of P3. So this is the price paid by, let me write, consumer. Price paid by consumer. And now let me ask this question. Is it the same price that is received by the producer? No. After the tax, these two get changed. Though you recognize this P3 to be the price paid by the consumer, what is the price received by the producer? This is the price. P1 is the price received by producer. That is the price received by producer. Then what's the difference between this P1 and P3? That is the amount of, this gap is the amount of unit tax, right? That's the amount of unit tax. The difference between P1 and P3 is the amount of unit tax. හරි එහෙනම් ඕක තමයි කතන්දරේ. දැන් ඔය ටික ඔයා දන්නවා නම් සහ තව චූටි දෙයක් දැනගන්න ඕනේ. මොකද්ද? So this is the market quantity before imposing the tax, and this is the market quantity after imposing the tax. So Q1 is the quantity, the quantity that get traded in the market after imposing the tax. Then ඔය ඔක්කොම ටික දන්නවා නම් සහ if you remember the things that we discussed here, make your answer nothing. මොකද්ද? This is what I told you previously. Right? This is what I told you previously. Consumer surplus is the region below the demand curve, above the market price, up to the quantity that is traded in the market. See, Q1 is a quantity that is traded in the market. So up to this quantity. So which region is that? That is region A. After imposing the tax, the consumer surplus is presented by this region A. If so, the answer has to be either the first one, if not the second one. Right? So hope you all understand up to that. The second thing, do you remember the way that I explained this region related to the producer surplus in the previous question? මම මොකද්ද කිව්වේ? එතන කියපේකම ආයමත් කියන්නේ. This is what I told you. That is the region above the supply curve. above the original supply curve. එහෙම එකක් නම් කලින් කිව්වේ නෑ. ඒක දැන් add කළා හරියද? Above the supply curve, the all supply curve. And below the price received by the producer, below this price received by the producer, up to the quantity that is traded in the market. And the producer's surplus get limited to this region H. And this has to be the answer, obviously, but let me show you the other region as well. So the consumer surplus is the region A, producer surplus is the region H, and they ask us to recognize even the deadweight loss. So what is the deadweight loss? Which region presents the deadweight loss? That is the loss incurred by the society by producing an inefficient quantity in the market. So this is the efficient market quantity that get decided based on the market demand and the market supply. But after imposing the tax, the quantity reduces. So this Q1 quantity is an inefficient quantity, right? So when they produce this inefficient quantity, the society loses this region which was previously recognized as a part of economic surplus. So this region DE we label as the deadweight loss. So obviously DE is the deadweight loss here. Then the answer has to be the second one. You have already found the answer. මෙතනට යන්න ඕනේ නෑනේ answer එක හොයාගන්න. You have already found the answer. But anyway, so for the question number 13, the answer is the second one. Right, now look at this question number 14. In 14th question, they have again given us this diagram. The diagram below represents a market for an agricultural product. All right. දැක්කම shape එක ඔයාලට මේක තේරුම් ගන්න පුළුවන් වෙන්න ඕනි. මොකද්ද මෙතන වෙලා තියෙන්නේ? දැන් ඔයා මේ level එකට එනකොට මේ ඔක්කොම ටික තේරුම් ගන්න පුළුවන් වෙන දැක්ක ගමන් this is the equilibrium price and this is the equilibrium quantity based on the market demand and market supply. Then the government has imposed a minimum price. So due to this minimum price, see what has happened to the quantity supplied that has increased up to this value of Q3 or up to this value of K, point K, and the quantity demanded has decreased to Q1 or that has decreased to this point X. ඊළඟට ඔයාලට තේරෙන්නේ නම් මේක ඉතුරු ටික දැන් මෙහෙම ඉරි ටිකක් ඇඳලා තියෙනවා කියලා කියන්නෙම the government has decided to implement a price support policy. They are going to buy this excess supply at the minimum price set by the government. ඕක තමයි මෙතන වෙලා තියෙන්නේ. අපිට ඉතුරු ටික නොකියුවත් ඔය ටික තේරෙන්න ඕන. ඔයාලට තාම මේ ටික තේරෙන්නේ නැත්නම් ඔයා තාම මේ වැඩේ හරියට කරන කෙනෙක් නෙමෙයි. Right, now read the given thing. The government sets a minimum price of OP2. Yes, the minimum price of OP2, assuming that it buys up all the surplus stocks, as we assume, right? Assuming that it buys up all the surplus stock at the minimum price, farmers' total revenue will be Mara Sarla Siddhya. So this is the price of a unit, and in total, they sell this much of a quantity through the market, and then this difference from Q1 to Q3 they sell to the government. So in total, from the farmers' point of view, they can sell Q3 amount of goods at the price P2. So their revenue will be simply presented by this entire rectangle. Right? So which is the correct answer then? The entire rectangle is presented by, let's say, O, P2, K, Q. That is the answer. මුලින්ම අහුනේ ඒකම තමයි. ඒතර අනිත් ඒවා බලලා ඇත්තටම වැඩක් නැහැ. නමුත් බලලා වැඩක් නැති වුණාට මම ඔයාලට තව දේවල් ටිකක් කියන්නම්. So what if you get a question in your paper in this way? If this is the given situation, what's the total cost incurred by the government to purchase this excess supply. Which region is that? Then that is this region. I hope that you all can understand that. එහෙනම් එතකොට වෙන්නේ මොකද්ද? Q1 X K Q3 is the total cost of purchasing the excess supply by the government. හැබැයි දැන් අහන්නේ ඒක නෙමෙයි නිසා first one is the answer. Alright, let's go to this question number 15. Look at the 15th one. A firm employs variable amount of labor to a fixed amount of capital to produce good X. Okay, so the firm must be operating in the short run, and that's why they increase only the labor by keeping the capital goods at a fixed level, capital resources at a fixed level. If the daily wage paid to labor increases, okay, how does it affect to the firm's cost? Okay, so under the firm's costs, they have given us the variable cost and the fixed costs and even the total cost. So if you just try to recognize the relationship between these three terms, this is the relationship. So the total variable cost plus total fixed cost is equal to the total cost. What is going to happen here? The firm is going to increase the daily wage that they pay for labor. Only that, right? They are going to increase the wage. This daily wage paid to the laborers, we recognize as a part of variable cost. So when the daily wage increases, the total variable cost increases. But is there any impact from this total variable cost to the total fixed cost? No. If you remember the things, the total fixed cost remains at a constant level in the short run. Now I'm taking note එක පෙන්නුවා. Look at this note. I'm telling you there, the total fixed cost, right? Total fixed cost. ඊට මම කියනවා there's no relationship between total fixed cost and the level of output. Even at zero production level, there's a fixed cost and it remains the same for any level of output. See that now. So what does that mean? If you go back to the question, when you increase the daily wage, yes, it's true that it increases the total variable cost, but the total fixed cost remains the same. But as a result of this increase that happens in total variable cost, the total cost also increases. You know, katandari. Then total variable cost increases, so one of the three must be the answer. Then the total fixed cost remains same, there's no change, and the total cost increases. So the correct answer for this one is the fourth one. Hope you all understand that. The 16th question. Which of the following is true about marginal revenue of a firm in a perfectly competitive industry? So I think, yes, I remember. We discussed this exact same thing in 2011 paper as well. But I'll explain that same thing once again to you. So if it's a firm operating in this perfectly competitive market, they can sell any quantity, right? They can sell any quantity at the decided market price. So if the market price, if you assume the market price to be 20, right? If they produce 100 units, they can sell all the 100 units at the market price 20. If they produce 200, they can sell even that at the market price 20. If they produce 300, they can even sell that at the market price 20. The only thing, it doesn't matter how much you produce. The only thing, you just need to sell it at the decided market price. So based on this demand schedule, right? Based on this demand schedule, if you just try to calculate the total revenue, what's the equation? The total revenue equals simply price into quantity. So 20 into 100 will be 2000, then this will be 4000, this will be 6000, and finally that will be 8000. That is the total revenue. And I believe that you remember the equation of calculating the marginal revenue. So marginal revenue is equal to the change of total revenue divided by the change of quantity, right? The change of quantity. So that the change of total revenue here is 2000 and the change of quantity is 100, and that's just 20. I mean, the marginal revenue in the first situation is 20. So let's calculate the marginal revenue in the second situation as well. So the change in total revenue is 2000 again, and the change in quantity is 100, so that the value is 20. In the third situation, the change in total revenue is once again 2000, and the change in quantity is 100, so that the value is once again 20. See, this is what happens. මොකද්ද වෙන්නේ? Even if you calculate the average revenue, මේව දැන් මම ආයිමත් කරන්න යන්නේ නැහැ මොකද 2011 එකේ මම මේකම කළා. Average revenue එක බැලුවත් it will be just 20. කරන්න නැහැ කිව්වට ඉතින් කෙරෙනවා. මොකද්ද? Average revenue is equal to total revenue divided by the quantity. එතකොට ආයිමත් වඩා 20 එනවා. එහෙනම් ඔයා මොකද්ද තේරුම් ගත්තේ? By looking at this table, you can recognize that if it's a firm operating in the perfect competitive market, price is always equal to the marginal revenue and average revenue, and that is again equal to the demand. මොකද මම එහෙම කියන්නේ, if you just draw a demand curve, right? If you just draw a demand curve, the shape of the demand curve faced by one firm in the perfect competitive market structure is this. ඒක මොකද්ද? Perfectly elastic demand curve. Right? That's a perfectly elastic demand curve. So this is the quantity, this is the price, and this is the demand curve. So this is, remember, this is the demand curve faced by one firm in the industry. එතකොට මේ demand curve එකේ මේ price එක මොකද්ද? Price is 20. එහෙනම් මේ ඔක්කොම සමානයි කියලා මම කිව්වේ මොකද්ද? Demand is equal to the, I mean the level of the demand curve is equal to the price. ඊට පස්සේ that is equal to the marginal revenue, that is once again equal to the average revenue. හැබැයි එහෙමයි කියලා ඔන්න දැන් ඔක්කොම සමානයි කියලා මේ MR TR සමානයි කියලා මම එහෙම එකක් කිව්වේ නෑ. You can understand that by looking at this thing, right? එතන එහෙනම් මේ ඔක්කොම සමානයි මොනවද? D P MR AR. එහෙනම් මොකද්ද අහන්නේ? Which of the following is true about the marginal revenue of a firm in a perfectly competitive industry? The marginal revenue is constant, and that is equal to the average revenue and price. ඔක තමයි කතන්දර. Right, now look at this question number 17. It says monopolistic competition is a market structure in which, all right, okay, so that's easy. So how many market structures we discuss here in this syllabus? We discuss about 4 different market structures. And what are the 4 market structures? The first one, as we discussed in the previous question, the first one is perfect competition. Perfect competition. The other one is monopolistic competition. Monopolistic competition. The third one is oligopoly. And the last one is monopoly. එතර මේ competition දෙක එක ළඟ එනවා, මේ දෙක එක ළඟ එනවා. ඒ තමයි වෙන්නේ. එතර if I ask you to tell me one example for each market structure, මොනවද දෙන examples? For perfect competition අපි ගමු eggs market. Those are like ready-made examples, right? මොනවද eggs market. And then for the monopolistic competition, we can even take tuition, right? No problem. So tuition, if not hotels, the saloons, whatever, right? So let's write saloons. And then for oligopoly, let's say network providers in Sri Lanka. Network providers. මම එකකින් කියන්නේ SLT, Mobitel, Hutch. Those are the network providers. And for monopoly, we can take this, let's say water board. water board are the examples. And now, if you go through the question once again, it says monopolistic competition is a market structure in which there is only one firm. No, there will be only one firm in the monopoly, not in the monopolistic competition market. The second one, a small number of firms. In a monopolistic competition, the given example is saloons, but how many saloons we have in Sri Lanka? Not small number. Again, very large, right? Very large. So that is also wrong there. You have small number of firms in oligopoly, not in monopolistic competition. The third one, a large number of firms. Yes, we have large number of firms producing an identical product. No, that is a problem. This part is correct, but not this part. The product is identical in the perfect competition, not in other market structures. And the fourth one, large number of firms providing a differentiated product. ඒක ඇත්ත. දැන් ඔයා මගෙන් economics ඉගෙන ගන්න එකයි වෙන කෙනෙක්ගේ economics ඉගෙන ගන්න එකයි දෙකක්. අපි දෙන්නම උගන්වන economics තමයි, but those are ඒ කියන්නේ ඔයාට ඒක එන විදිය difference එකක් තියෙනවා. Right? There's a difference. එහෙනම් no advertising no. Advertising no කියලා කියන්න පුළුවන්ද? දැන් tuition නැත්නම් saloons ඒවායේ advertising no කියලා කියන්න පුළුවන්ද? ඒවා තමයි advertising වැඩිම තියෙන්නේ. Enisa, this is the answer. Sorry, this is the answer. Fourth one. Right, 18th. It says gross domestic product, right? GDP is the sum of all exchanges of goods and services during a given year. Then when I say sum of all exchanges, mama පාවිච්චි කරපු vehicle එක විකුණුවත් ඔයා එක ගත්තොත් even that we recognize as an exchange of good. හැබැයි ප්‍රශ්නේ තියෙන්නේ, do we consider the exchanges, do we consider transactions related to used goods when calculating the GDP? No, we don't consider them. ඒ නිසා මේක අපිට පිළිගන්න බෑ. මොකද when they say all exchanges, it includes the exchanges of used goods. But we ignore used goods when calculating GDP. So this is wrong. The second one, GDP includes financial transactions. No, we ignore financial transactions as well. The third one, because the reason why we ignore these, the exchanges of used goods and the financial transactions is the same reason. What is that? They don't add a value to the economy. There's no value addition from those. That's why we ignore them. Okay, the third one, it includes the purchases of goods at intermediate stage of production. No, once again, we ignore them as well. In the output method, when you calculate the GDP, you can do it in, mainly you can do it there in two different methods. The first method is the final value method. The other method is the value added method. Those are the two methods that we apply in the output method. We ignore the intermediary goods. So that is also not the answer. Then the fourth one, gross domestic product is the sum of the total spending on all final user goods and services produced domestically during a given. That's the exact definition we give for GDP in the expenditure approach. So this is 100% true. Right? This is 100% true. And then the fifth one, GDP includes all goods and services produced during a given period, not all goods, only final goods. So that's why this is wrong again. And answer for this question 18 is the fourth one. Right, now look at this 19th one. Which of the following will most likely occur during the expansionary phase of the business cycle. Okay, so let me just show you the expansionary phase of the business cycle, right? So here you have the potential output, and then this is the bottom, this is the peak, and the region between the bottom and the peak we recognize as the expansion, right? That we recognize as the expansion. The most likely scenario to occur. Real GDP rises and unemployment falls. Okay, so the first thing that you need to understand is if we are referring to this expansionary phase, these things happen. So let me show you the relevant note, then you can understand that. Now read this. This is about expansion. It says the recovery of an economy from a trough is called an expansion. In this stage, see, this is the most important part. In this stage, the economy grows due to increase in aggregate demand. Okay, so the aggregate demand increases. And then during this period, the real output, right, the level of employment and the level of income, everything increases, right? Everything increases. So in a mulima venimaka, the aggregate demand increases, then the real output increases, the level of employment increases, and even the level of income increases. See, that is the problem. I mean, when the level of income of the people, when that increases, they have comparatively high amount of money to spend on goods and services. So it could lead to demand pull inflation. Right? It could lead to demand pull inflation. However, the economy may experience an inflationary pressure during this stage. And the reason is this. It increases the level of income of the people. Right? මොකක් විදිහට අපි ආන්සර් එක අඳුරගන්නේ? Come to this question once again. Which of the following will most likely to occur during the expansionary phase of the business cycle? Real GDP rises, yes, true. Unemployment falls, yes, true. Because the level of employment increases, and unemployment falls, 100% true. The second one, real GDP rises, yes, true. Unemployment rises, no. Unemployment decreases. Real GDP declines, no. Falls. Interest rates rise, and the number of business failures, no. Expansion that's simply the opposite. Inflation rises, yes, true. Employment falls. Then දෙකක් තියෙනවා. මොකද්ද? Inflation rises, අනිත් එක employment falls. එතන තියෙන දෙකක් නෑ. ඒතර employment falls කියලා තියෙන්නේ, so that is wrong. මොකද unemployment තමයි falls, employment increases. එහෙනම් so the answer is the first one. Question 19, first one is the answer. All right, 20th one. Look at the 20th one. In calculating GDP, all of the following are excluded except one thing, and you need to recognize that one thing. Okay. The first one, the value of intermediate goods. Yes, that's what I explained earlier. When discussing this question 18, I explained that we do not consider the value of intermediary goods. We ignore them. So that's true. I mean, it's true that we ignore them, right? The next one, the value of all homes, the value of all the houses built in the year in question. Yes, no problem. We can include that whatever the value when calculating the GDP, we can include that because there is this value addition in the economy. එහෙනම් දැන් ප්‍රශ්නය යන්නේ මොකද්ද? In calculating GDP, all of the following are excluded except one thing, and this is the one that we do not exclude. We should include this when calculating the GDP. The third one, the value of used goods. Yes, it's true that we ignore them. Purely financial transactions we ignore. Subsidies from the government, which means simply the transfers, even the transfers we ignore. And all these other four we ignore except the second one. And that's the answer for question number 20. Those are easy ones. Alright, now look at this question number 21. Selected macroeconomic data for an economy is given below. Alright, so you get the government purchases, which we recognize as G. So G equals 500. Wages and other supplementary labor incomes. Okay, so let's say for the time being, that's a labor payment or the wages. Normally W stands for the withdrawals. So let me just write wages here then. Wages 2000, and the depreciation capital consumption, right? Capital consumption is 400, and then private consumption, which is the consumption expenditure, and that's C. So that is 2200, and the net exports NX is minus 50. Hope you all see that it's minus. And then net indirect taxes 150. Net taxes 150. Right, now what's the answer then? What's the question then? Net domestic product at market price. Okay, net domestic product at market price. But before we find this net domestic product at market price, what if I simply ask you to calculate this GDP? Based on the data that you see here, you can understand that you should follow this expenditure approach this time. If you follow this expenditure approach, this is what you consider as the GDP, the consumption expenditure, the investment expenditure. I forgot that, right? So investment, I missed that. Gross investment is here as 400. So I is 400. And then government purchases and net exports. So the total of these four components we can recognize to be the GDP. So 2200 plus I is 400 plus G is 500. Net exports will be that's minus 50. So that the total is 3050. That's the total, right? But remember, that's not the answer. This is just the GDP. But what do they ask us to find? They ask us to find the net domestic product. Right? The net domestic, this is anyway at market price. The expenditure approach gives you the value at market price, so no problem with that. But the problem is with this. Apilanga thiyene gross domestic product, but they need the net domestic product. So net domestic product equals gross domestic product minus, what do we deduct from this? Capital consumption, right? Capital consumption. So GDP is 3050. From that, you deduct the capital consumption, that is just 400. We have recognized it here. So that will be how much then? 2650, right? 2650. That's the answer. So first one is the answer for this question number 21. Before we move to this question 22, let's keep them aside. Okay, we don't need them now. Now we will read this question number 22. It says, assume that an economy operating at equilibrium exports is 400, that is X. That's 400. Let me change the color. 400. Then imports 500. Taxes 1200. Government purchases 1500. And savings 1000. Then the level of investment. Okay, by looking at the question, see the way that it gives you the values. They say assume that in an economy operating at equilibrium, which means the macroeconomic equilibrium, the equilibrium of the entire economy. So when the macroeconomic equilibrium occurs, the level of injections become equal to the level of withdrawals in the economy. W stands for the withdrawals here. එහෙනම් දැන් අපි මේක හැදුවොත් එහෙම we know that there are mainly this is an open economy. We can understand that because we have imports and exports here, so this must be an open economy. So in an open economy, what are the components coming under injections? The investments, the government expenditure, and what's the last one? That's about the exports, because this is an open economy. And as withdrawals, we get the savings, we have taxes, and we have imports. So by giving all these data, they simply ask us to recognize the value of investments, which is very simple. So let's write investments plus the government expenditure 1,500 plus exports, that is 400, and that is equal to 100. Savings is 100. Sorry, that's 1,000, right? Savings, that's 1,000. And then the taxes, that's 1,200, and the imports is given to us as how much? 500 imports. This has to be M, right? 500. Then I plus 1,900 equals 2,700. Yes, 2,700. Then the level of investment in the economy at the equilibrium is how much then? That has to be 600. So investment has to be 600. Fortunately, we don't have that. So that is wrong. Wait. So what's the error that has happened here? Then අපිට මේ values ටික මෙහෙම දීලා තියෙනවා. ඊට පස්සේ sorry about that, the final value is wrong. So 2,700 minus this thing will be just 800. Sorry about that, right? So it's 800 million. අරග වෙලාවට තිබුණ නැත්තේ. So this is the answer. Okay. Now we will look at this question number 23, right? Question 23. It says, which of the following will result in the greatest increase in aggregate demand? Right, we will just quickly go through the given options. Rupees 100 million increase in taxes. Obviously, that's not the answer. The reason when the tax is increased, it reduces the aggregate demand. It reduces their consumption, even investments, so that ultimately it reduces the aggregate demand. And then we have this 100 million decrease in tax. Yes, when taxes, when the government reduce the taxes, it will influence on the aggregate demand. It will increase the aggregate demand. That is true. It was a 100 million decrease in government purchases. 100 million increase in government purchases. So yes, even from that, the aggregate demand will increase. Because the government purchases is just one component coming under aggregate demand. Right. Now we found two. The fourth one says 100 million increase in government purchases, coupled with 100 million increase in taxes. Okay, so we have a combination here. The last one, 100 million increase in government purchases coupled with 100 million decrease in taxes. Okay. The answer is anyway easy, but let me just discuss the entire thing with regard to this question number 23. If you need to recognize the answer theoretically, you need to calculate the multipliers, the relevant multipliers. Now, when it comes to this case, you need to calculate the tax multiplier, and also you need to calculate the government expenditure multiplier. So we'll do the calculations assuming that MPC is 0.8. So let me write, assuming MPC equals 0.8, right? Assuming so, let me calculate the tax multiplier, right? Tax multiplier. So what's the equation of calculating this tax multiplier? The equation is minus, right, MPC divided by, either you can write 1 minus MPC, if not MPS. So let me write 1 minus MPC. So that is the tax multiplier. And Also, let me calculate this government expenditure multiplier, that is 1 over 1 minus MPC, right? 1 over 1 minus MPC. So based on the assumed value 0.8, this is what you get here, minus 0.8 divided by 1 minus 0.8. So this will give you the answer minus 4. And here you have 1 over 1 minus 0.8, and that will give you the answer plus 5. Keep this in mind, the previous value is minus, but the government expenditure multiplier is plus. Okay, so to find the correct answer, now the possible answers are these: decrease in taxes, increase in government purchases, and these. අපි මේ හතරම ගමුකෝ possible answers කියලා. හරි, එහෙනම් දැන් අපි බලමු one by one. The first one, due to the first one, if you need to calculate the change that happens in aggregate demand, you just need to multiply the multiplier, the relevant multiplier. In this case, it's a tax multiplier with the amount of change in tax. And how much will be that? The tax multiplier is minus 4, and then they say that the government will decrease the taxes. So that is once again minus 100, so that the output, the change that happens in aggregate demand is plus 400, right? The change that happens in the aggregate demand is plus 400. That is one thing. I mean, that's the outcome suggested in the second option. The third one, so once again, 100 million increase in government purchases. Okay, government purchases multiplier, we multiply by the change in the government purchases. That will give you 5 multiply, I mean this 5, right? 5 multiplied by the change in government expenditure, that is 100, so that will be 500, right? That will be 500. And then the fourth one, right? The fourth one, delta y multiplied by c. Okay, it's a combination. So 100 million increase in government purchases. එතන 100 million increase in government purchases කියවම අපි දන්නවා ඒකෙන් එන outcome එක මේකම තමයි. So it will increase the aggregate demand by 500. ඊළඟට coupled with 100 million increase in tax. එතන 100 million මේ තියෙන්නේ 100 million decrease in tax. This is the outcome of decrease in the tax by 100 million. එහෙනම් ඒකේ opposite has to be the outcome of increase in the tax. එහෙනම් මෙතන ආවේ plus 400 නම්, right? මෙතන ආවේ plus 400 නම්, when the tax is increased, the aggregate demand will decrease by 400, so that the ultimate impact is how much? Just 100 million. So that's the output of the fourth suggestion. And the fifth one is this: 100 million increase in government purchases. Okay, then this delta y, due to that first part, the aggregate demand will increase by 500. ඊළඟට coupled with 100 million decrease in tax. See, this is what will happen to the aggregate demand if the tax is reduced. And that will be plus 400. So ultimately, the aggregate demand will increase by 900. So if you go back to the question, what is the question? Which of the following will result in the greatest increase in aggregate demand? So the greatest increase in aggregate demand you receive in the when you do the fifth one. The fifth suggestion is the answer. So for question 23, fifth one is the answer. Right. So that's the answer for this question 23. We'll move to question 24 now. Right. Now look at this question number 24. It says, if an autonomous increase in spending in an economy is 100 million, leads to an increase in real GDP of 500 million. See, then both questions test the same theory, right? It's the same theory. Both questions test the same theory. Then අපි මේ චුට්ටකට කලින් තමයි අර කලින් ගානේ හැදුවේ මොකද්ද? Delta y is equal to the multiplier times the change that happens in the autonomous spending. Right? Autonomous spending. autonomous expenditure කියලා මම ඒ කියලා දැනට එක දාගන්න. ඒතර ගානේ මොකක්ද කියන්නේ? If an autonomous increase in spending in an economy is 100 million, okay, so the delta AE is 100 million, leads to an increase in real GDP, the aggregate income, aggregate income by 500. So delta Y is 500. Then for that economy, the marginal propensity to consume must have been, okay, so using this equation, we can find the value of multiplier. So it's very simple. So the multiplier is 5. 500 divided by 100. That's just 5. And we all know how to calculate this multiplier related to autonomous spending. So what's the way? That's this one that we calculated earlier as well. So 1 over 1 minus MPC. So K is 5. So you write 5 equals 1 over 1 minus what මේ MPC කියන එක ලියන එක අමාරු නම් simply replace that with x. එහෙනම් what happens? 1 minus x equals 1 over 5. That is 0.2. Then if you send this x to the other side and take this 0.2 to the left side, it will be 1 minus 0.2. So x will be how much? 0.8. So MPC is 0.8. Yes, we have it here. So that's the answer for this question number 24. So that is one thing. And yeah, so that's the end of this macroeconomic equilibrium set of questions. Now we move to this question number 25. Money and banking. Right, now look at this question 25. An increase, in an economy where nominal GNP is 5,000 billion and the money supply is 1,000 billion, the velocity of circulation is. දැන් මේක දකිනකොට ඔළුවට එන්න ඕනේ that this is a relevant theory කියලා. මොකක්ද theory එක? I hope that you all remember that we have this thing, this equation called equation of exchange. So let me show you the relevant theory, the equation of exchange. So right now look at this note. It's about this equation of exchange, and it says the equation of exchange presents the relationship between the value of nominal GDP and the total value of monetary expenditure. So the equality of the two, right, is presented by this equation of exchange. So on one side we have the nominal GDP, and on the other side we get the total value of monetary expenditure, and theoretically these two must be identical, equal. And at the same time, if you just go to this part of the note, right, if you go to this last part of the note, it says එහෙනම් මොකක්ද අතන වෙන්න ඕනේ කියලා කිව්වේ? The nominal GDP must be same as the total monetary transactions. Total monetary transactions. So this is what should happen. Similarly, the nominal value of an economy's output, which means the nominal GDP is I'm referring to this, right? Nominal GDP is determined by multiplying the price level, which is P, by multiplying the price level by the real output, which we denote as T. So PT. So P into T gives you the nominal GDP. And it must be equal to, on the other hand, the total value of money expenditure, the monetary transaction, is obtained by multiplying the money supply, money supply, by the velocity of money. So you take the money supply, you multiply that by the velocity of money, then you get the total monetary transactions in the economy. And when you multiply P and T, you get the total value of nominal GDP. That is this equation of exchange. So keeping that in mind, if you come to this question number 25, අපිට තේරෙනවා මෙහෙම සීන් එක. මොකද්ද? In an economy where nominal GNP is 5,000 billion. ඒගොල්ලෝ කෙලින්ම දීලා තියෙනවා nominal GNP, gross national product is given, right? Gross national product is given. ඊට පස්සේ it has to be same as the total monetary transactions. එතකොට දැන් මම ඒවල කිව්වා තමයි that you need to multiply the price level by the real output to get this nominal GDP, or in this case GNP. ඒක කිව්ව එක ඇත්ත. But the problem in this question, that value is given to you directly, so you don't need to multiply that with anything else. Already this output we get by multiplying the values P and T. 5,000 you can just take directly here. And to find the total monetary transactions, you take the money supply and you multiply that by the velocity of money circulation. And you take 5,000, you make it equal to the money supply multiplied by the velocity. So velocity is simply 5. So that's the answer there.